Sign here, my stepmother said, sliding the folder across the mahogany table like she was doing me a favor. It's just a formality. I looked at the document, 15 pages. Dense legal language. My father's signature already on the bottom of every page. What exactly am I signing? She smiled the way people smile when they've already won. It releases your share of the estate assets into the family trust for management purposes. Your father and I will handle the distributions. I was 26 years old. My father had just been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, and my stepmother had spent the last 4 years making sure I understood, in every subtle and not-so-subtle way, that I was a guest in this family. Not a member. A guest. I didn't sign. My name is Rachel. My mother died when I was 9. Ovarian cancer, fast, and merciless. My father remarried 3 years later. A woman named Diane who came with 2 children of her own, Connor, 22 at the time of this story, and Brianna, 19. They moved into our house. My mother's house. My mother's house. Diane redecorated within 6 months. The photos of my mother migrated from the living room to a hallway, then from the hallway to a box in the attic. My father is a good man who loves too easily and trusts even more easily. That is the kindest way I know how to say it. I work as a forensic accountant. I trace money for a living. I find what people try to hide. I notice patterns. I notice gaps. I notice when numbers don't add up, and I have never once in my professional life ignored a number that didn't add up, which is why, when my father mentioned at dinner one evening that his investment portfolio had been restructured and then immediately changed the subject, I started paying attention. Restructured how? I asked. Diane handles most of that now, he said, not meeting my eyes. She has a good head for finances. Diane was a former real estate agent who had never once, in my presence, demonstrated a good head for anything more complex than selecting throw pillows. I smiled and passed the breadbasket. But I was already running numbers in my head. My father had built his money carefully. 28 years as a civil engineer, sensible investments, a house paid off before 60. When my mother died, her life insurance, $400,000, went into a trust for me, to be accessible when I turned 25. My father managed it as trustee. I had turned 25 8 months ago. I had received nothing. When I asked 6 months earlier, my father had said the trust had been consolidated for tax efficiency. When I pressed, he became vague in the particular way he becomes vague when Diane has coached him on what to say. When I pressed further, he said he'd have the paperwork sent to me. The paperwork never came, so I hired an attorney. Not to be aggressive, just to request the trust documents through proper legal channels. Standard procedure. A beneficiary requesting records of a trust they are named in. Nothing dramatic. The documents arrived on a Tuesday morning. I read them at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I got through page 3. The trust had not been consolidated for tax efficiency. The trust had been systematically liquidated over 4 years. $212,000, withdrawn in increments small enough to avoid automatic reporting thresholds. The listed purpose on the majority of withdrawals was Investment Reinvestment Fairview Property Holdings LLC. I had never heard of Fairview Property Holdings LLC. I pulled out my laptop. Fairview Property Holdings LLC was registered in Delaware 18 months ago. The registered agent was a formation service, standard for anonymous LLCs. But Delaware requires a list of members for tax purposes, and through a combination of public record requests and a database my firm pays dearly for, I found the operating agreement. Members, Diane Calloway Marsh, Connor Calloway, my stepmother and her son. I sat very still for a long time. Then I opened a new spreadsheet and started from the beginning. By the time I was done, I had traced $212,000 from my mother's trust into Fairview Property Holdings. I had traced an additional $440,000 from my father's personal brokerage account into the same entity over 3 years, listed in his records as loans to family business. I had found a property purchased by Fairview in Scottsdale, Arizona, a vacation home, 4 bedrooms, pool, currently valued at $890,000. Connor had been photographed at that property 6 times on his public Instagram. Diane's Pinterest had a board called Our Arizona Retreat that she had, apparently, forgotten to set to private. Total moved $552,000. My father earned that money over 20 years. My mother's insurance was meant for me. I did not call my father. Not yet. Because I knew that if I called him, Diane would find out, and evidence would disappear. I had seen it before in my work. The moment someone knows they're caught, they move fast. Instead, I called my attorney back and told her what I found. Then I made 2 more calls, one to a forensic imaging specialist I trust, and one to a CPA who handles estate litigation. We had 3 weeks before the next family dinner, my father's birthday. Diane had already sent a group text about it. Catered. 30 guests. 3 weeks was enough time. The thing about financial fraud and family trusts is that people assume love makes them invisible. They believe that the person being stolen from will choose the relationship over the truth. And they are right, often enough, that it becomes a pattern. Families absorb this kind of theft for years, decades, sometimes, because confronting it means confronting everything: the remarriage, the favoritism, the slow erasure of one life to make room for another. I had spent 17 years being the daughter who was grateful to still have a father, grateful enough not to ask too many questions, grateful enough to sit at a table where my mother's recipes were made by a woman who never said her name, and call it home. Gratitude, I had learned, is sometimes just silence with better manners. I was done being grateful. During those 3 weeks, I watched. That was my training. Watch before you move. At a family lunch, I let Diane talk about the Arizona property freely, casually, the way people talk about things they believe are safe. She mentioned the pool renovation. She mentioned Connor was thinking of renting it out part-time. She mentioned, with a small laugh, that it had been a lucky investment. "Where did you find the opportunity?" I asked, keeping my voice light and genuinely curious. She looked at me for just half a second too long. "Oh, a contact of your father's." He was very supportive of the whole thing. My father was nodding. He believed this, or he had chosen to believe it, which is its own kind of tragedy. "That's wonderful," I said. "I'd love to see the paperwork sometime. I'm always looking for good investment structures." "Of course," she said. "I'll dig that up." She never would, but I already had it. The week before my father's birthday, my attorney sent formal letters to Diane, my father, and Connor, notifying them that I had retained counsel regarding the trust and was requesting a full accounting, return of assets, and a meeting to discuss resolution before any further legal action was initiated. I was told later, by my aunt who had been talking to my father, that Diane's response upon receiving the letter was to immediately call a family meeting without me, that she told my father I was being manipulative, that I was jealous of the family they had built, that I had always been difficult. My father called me that night. His voice was tired in the way it gets when he's been managing someone else's emotions for hours. "Rachel, this is a lot. This is a big step." "I know." "Diane is devastated. She feels like you're attacking the family." I let a breath out slowly. "Dad, did you know that Mom's trust account has been liquidated?" Silence. "Did you know that $212,000 from that account went into an LLC that Diane and Connor own?" More silence. A different kind. She said it was being invested for all of us. "Dad." I said it quietly. "There is no version of for all of us that doesn't include telling me I'm the beneficiary. That money was mine." I heard him exhale. A long, slow exhale. The sound of something he had been holding for a long time finally leaving his body. "I didn't read everything," he said. "She handles it. I trust her. I know you do." "Are you sure about these numbers?" "Dad, I do this for a living." Another silence. Then, very quietly, "Okay." That one word cost him something enormous. I knew that. I held it carefully. "The birthday dinner is still happening," I said. "I'll be there. But I need you to let this play out. Can you do that for me?" "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let her answer some questions in front of people who deserve to hear the answers." My father's birthday dinner was held at their house. 30 people, catered, white tablecloths, the kind of event Diane excels at because surfaces are her specialty. She had placed herself at the center of every arrangement, the flowers, the seating, the little speech she'd clearly prepared about what a wonderful husband my father was and how blessed they were as a family. I arrived on time. I brought wine. I hugged my father for slightly longer than usual, and he held on. Connor was there, tan from Arizona, wearing a watch I recognized from Diane's Instagram as a birthday gift she had given him last spring. Brianna was there, quieter, who I have always believed knows more than she lets on and has simply decided that survival requires silence. I understand that choice. I made it for 17 years. I had coordinated with my attorney, who was not present but was available by phone. I had a folder in my bag. I had practiced what I was going to say and, more importantly, what I was not going to say, because restraint, in moments like this, is the only thing that keeps you from becoming the villain of your own story. Diane gave her speech after dinner. It was polished. She talked about building a life together, about family being a choice, about the beautiful future ahead. She looked at my father with an expression I'm sure she believed was love. When she sat down, I stood up. I'd also like to say a few words, I said. If that's okay. She looked at me. A half-second assessment. She decided I was going to be gracious, because in her model of me, I was always ultimately gracious, grateful, well-mannered enough to stay quiet. Of course, she said. I thanked my father. I meant every word. That part was real. Then I said, Dad, you've always told me that honesty is the most important thing in a family, that it's what makes a family different from just people living in the same house. I paused. I want to honor that tonight. I opened my folder and I placed a single document on the table in front of him. Not theatrically, calmly. The way you place evidence when you are certain of it. This is the transaction history for the trust my mother left me. And I have some questions I'd like to give Diane the opportunity to answer. In front of everyone, she's told for years that I'm difficult and jealous and ungrateful. I looked at Diane directly. I think they deserve to hear your answers too. The room was very quiet. Diane's face did the thing I have seen faces do when a story they have controlled for a long time suddenly stops being controllable. It flickered. Just for a moment. Then it hardened into the performance of offense. This is completely inappropriate, she said. This is your father's birthday. It is, I said, and I'm giving him the truth as a gift, which is more than you've given him in 4 years. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked through the numbers. Not all of them. I'm not cruel, and my father was in that room. But enough. $212,000 from my mother's trust. Fairview Property Holdings. The Scottsdale property. The operating agreement with Diane and Connor's names on it. Connor stood up at some point, said it was all legitimate, that my father had agreed to everything, that I was trying to blow up the family because I'd always resented Diane. Your father agreed to things he didn't fully read, I said, not to Connor, but to the room. That's on her, not him. I turned back to Diane, but what I'd really like to understand is this. I pulled out one more document, a property appraisal, the Scottsdale house, current value. The property purchased with money from my mother's trust and my father's brokerage account is now worth $890,000. You've listed it as an asset of Fairview Property Holdings, LLC. My father is not a member of that LLC. I am not a member of that LLC. I looked at her. So whose retirement is that exactly? She said nothing. The room said nothing. My father looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked at his wife. Diane, he said. Just her name, in a tone I had never heard from him before. Not angry, not sad. Empty. The tone of a man looking at something he built and realizing the foundation was never what he thought it was. She started to cry. That was her move. I had anticipated it. Tears that come on cue are not evidence of remorse. They are evidence of a different kind of calculation. I was protecting the family, she said. I was trying to grow these assets for everyone. My mother's money, I said quietly, was not yours to protect. My father asked Diane to leave the dinner. She didn't. At first. But my aunt asked her, and then 2 of my father's oldest friends asked her, and eventually, the room had made its position clear without anyone having to raise their voices. Connor left with her. Brianna stayed. She sat next to me for the rest of the evening and did not say much, but at one point she put her hand briefly on my arm and said, I'm sorry. I knew something was wrong. I should have said something. You were protecting yourself, I said. I understand that. It wasn't right. No, I agreed. It wasn't. The legal process took 11 months. Diane retained an attorney who argued that all transfers had been made with my father's knowledge and implied consent. My attorney argued that a trustee cannot consent on behalf of a beneficiary, and that my father's consent, even if genuine, did not extend to my inheritance. Diane eventually agreed to a settlement that included full restitution of the $212,000 from my mother's trust, a lien on the Scottsdale property until the matter of the brokerage funds was resolved, and a structured repayment plan for the remaining $340,000. Connor retained separate counsel and argued he had received the funds as loans from his mother. That argument did not survive contact with the Fairview LLC operating agreement, which listed him as a 40% equity member. He repaid his share. My parents, my father and Diane, separated 4 months after the birthday dinner and finalized their divorce 7 months after that. My father sold the family house. He bought a smaller place 2 towns over. The first thing he did was find the box in the attic with my mother's photos. He called me when he unpacked them. "I found the one from the Grand Canyon," he said, "the one where she's laughing at something off camera. I remember that one. Do you want it? Or should I don't know." I thought maybe we could both. "Keep it, Dad," I said. "Put it somewhere you can see it." He did. People ask me sometimes, in the abstract way people ask forensic accountants about their work, how you know when someone is hiding something. I tell them it's almost never dramatic. It's not a locked drawer or a suspicious withdrawal on a single Tuesday. It's a pattern. It's a number that's slightly wrong in a way that isn't wrong enough to explain unless you assume someone made it that way on purpose. It's a hesitation, a subject change, a document that was promised and never arrived. The truth in financial fraud is almost always visible. It just requires someone willing to look. My mother spent 22 years building a life, and when she died, the last thing she did was make sure I would be okay. She couldn't know what would come after. She couldn't know about Diane or the LLC or the house in Scottsdale with the pool renovation. She just knew that I was 9 years old and that the world can be hard and that she wanted to leave me something solid to stand on when I needed it. I found it, 11 years late and through a settlement agreement rather than a trust distribution, but I found it. I put half of it in an index fund. I used the other half to buy a small condo, 2 bedrooms, good light, a kitchen where I have, slowly, been teaching myself to make my mother's recipes. Not from memory. From the index cards she left in a wooden box that my father found in the same attic where her photos had been stored. Her handwriting is small and precise. She underlines ingredients she considers important. She leaves margin notes like, "Don't rush this part," and Grandma always added more than it says. I don't rush it. I add more than it says. I don't rush it. I add more than it says. I think she would have liked that. And if you've ever been the person at the table who was told to be grateful for whatever you were given, I want you to know that gratitude and silence are not the same thing. You are allowed to ask for the accounting. You are allowed to read the documents. You are allowed to stand up at the birthday dinner. The truth was always there. Sometimes you just have to be the one willing to find it. If this story stayed with you, you know where the like button is. And if you know someone who needed to hear this today, send it to them. I'll see you next time on Karma's Turn. There's a version of this story where I sign the papers, where I accept the vague explanation about tax efficiency and tell myself that family is complicated and some things are better left alone. I almost lived that version. For 8 months after I turned 25, I came close to deciding that the fight wasn't worth the damage it would do to my father, to the fragile peace we had built, to whatever was left of the word home. But here's what I've come to understand about silence. It doesn't actually protect anything. It just delays the accounting. Every choice has a consequence that compounds quietly in the background, whether you're watching or not. Diane made choices for years. Small ones, then larger ones, then ones with 6 figures attached, and every single one of them created a trail. Not because she was careless, but because actions leave evidence. That is simply how the world works. You cannot take something that doesn't belong to you and have it leave no mark. The math always catches up. What I did, what Rachel did, was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because those two things are easy to confuse. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. What I did was closer to accounting. I followed the numbers. I documented what I found. I gave the truth an audience. The consequences that followed came not from my anger, but from the choices that had already been made long before I ever opened a spreadsheet. That distinction matters, because it speaks to something I believe deeply. The kind of strength worth having is not the strength to destroy someone, but the strength to stay clear-headed when every instinct is telling you to react. To gather the facts before you speak, to build the case before you make the accusation, to walk into that birthday dinner calm because you have already done the work And the work is sound. Intelligence without courage is just knowing the right answer and staying quiet. Courage without intelligence is noise. What changes things is when you put them together, when you understand the situation fully and then choose to act with precision instead of emotion. That combination is harder to come by than either one alone. It is also, I have found, nearly impossible to argue with. My mother left me money, but she also left me something harder to measure: the expectation that I would take care of myself, that I would be the kind of person who asks the right questions and reads the documents and does not accept a vague answer where a clear one is owed. I did not know, when I was 9 years old, that I was learning anything. But she was showing me every day what it looked like to be honest and careful and precise in the way you move through the world. I carried that forward. And in the end, it was the most valuable thing she gave me. If you're sitting somewhere right now and there is a number that doesn't add up, or a document that was promised and never arrived, or an answer that was just a little too smooth, trust that instinct. It is not paranoia. It is pattern recognition, and it has never once, in my experience, been wrong.